Done a few sessions and conversations. I'm going to focus on data. I'm going to talk about, I'm delighted to be back in Sri Lanka. I was here in August last time. And for every quarter that passes, or every month, people here in Sri Lanka follow that pattern that we've seen in Myanmar and Vietnam and other countries in Southeast Asia. Data-driven decisions are growing. People are more and more interested in data intelligence around it. Not just STR data, but every source available. And that comes with owners, with investors, the brands themselves, and the local brands too. So it's very encouraging for us as a data company to see that more and more people are looking at it. It's not just the Marriotts and the Hiltons who look at these numbers. It's all the local companies too. And it's growing for every month. So that's fantastic. So we're going to talk a bit about Sri Lanka, what's been happening in the last few months, what's been happening probably a little bit moving forward, and raise a question at the end, what do we think about the future, and what are the challenges and the opportunity as well that we've heard of so far this morning. But I start by saying the one word that permeates the world in total right now, and that's uncertainty, right? And it's not just the natural disasters that are growing, or the increasing threat of terrorism, or the migration crisis. So set that all aside, but you have the political challenges of Brexit, for instance. So with Great Britain leaving the EU unprecedented, this uncertainty, I've talked to people who are looking to invest in the UK, but you become cautious. Do you need to be an opportunistic investor to go into the UK if you don't know what's going to happen in the next few years? Now, we may see in 3 or 4 years that it may have been a smart move to be the first one out, and not Greece or anyone else. But there's too much uncertainty around it. And we know the currency has taken a big, big beating since the referendum took place. And there were very few people in this room who knew that the president-elect was going to be Donald J. Trump. And there's still a lot of people thinking that it cannot be and it mustn't be. But it is. So regardless of recounts and everything. So this creates another uncertainty. What's going to happen to trade agreements? TPP looks obviously quite dead in the waters as a trade ship agreement. But everything else, it creates an additional layer of uncertainty from the largest economy of the world. So 8 November was a big date, but that election meant nothing in a country that decided to take away 86% of all cash in one night. So remarkable. I think for 10 years from now, everyone's going to look at India in the textbook and see, how did that happen? How did it work? It's a very brave and bold decision. But when somewhere between 1% and 2% of the entire Indian population pay income tax, something had to be done. So massive challenges and uncertainty in India too. So wherever I am, it seems like that's the new norm of this uncertainty. So it's not easy being an investor, it would seem. But a quick example on Britain, which not just speaks, because it's not just all about Brexit. So we talk a lot about today on supply and demand. So that blue curve you see, that's demand that was growing faster, that's on top, great. It means you're selling more rooms, it's growing faster. But then in the last 6 months, if you can see on the side screens, that dark blue is lower. So demand was shrinking down, and actually this October in London was the lowest October since 2008. So some challenges that have happened already. So where do we think it's going to happen and continue for London? Well, the forecast is that supply will continue and demand will come back, but it's going to take time. So that V-shaped valley you see means that for about 18 to 24 months, pressure is on in London. So add that to the Brexit challenges, it may not be easy. So just an example of one market. But talk about challenges, we have to talk about Middle East. The 9.3, the 9% growth, negative growth for this year to date until September is very strong, and it was similar numbers end of last year in a way. I think you all know why that is. When you have an oil price that low for that long, and people are now saying in the future, single-digit barrel prices may be it, right? So as they adjust their GDP to this new economy of not being oil-based, of being tourism and economics, this is going to take time. Everyone knows this, and we know that there's an extremely big pipeline still happening across the Middle Eastern region. So the challenges in the past 12 months are likely to continue in the Middle East, where a lot of new hotels are being planned and built. So it's putting pressure on operational excellence to achieve the profitability of past. Now, overall Asia Pacific, taking the 10-year view, supply and demand, what happened after the financial crisis, came back, and you see the supply just steady sailing, steady growth throughout all these months. 2 points, 2 takeaways from this slide. The first one is we zoom in at the end and see demand took a big hike this year and grew faster, and that's something that Gerald from WTTC talks about, how the travel is growing. Because travel is growing. We can talk about all these challenges and uncertainty, but travel is growing. And intra-Asian travel is growing even faster. So there is good news in that, because we still have the growth of the middle class and a lot of these big economies that are growing. So travel is growing, and this consistent supply growth is, if you have that, you will see better results. So as a result, this year, Asia Pacific has grown faster than last year. And if you split it up into 4 sub-regions, there's a reason why Australia, New Zealand attracts a lot of investment interest. Look at that stability from 2009 index. Straight line up. It's Chinese money, Indonesian money, Indian money, pretty much from everywhere. People wanted to get in on Australia and New Zealand, not just because of RevPAR, but overall returns and the stability. Not talking political stability. They've had, 10 prime ministers in 2 years? Doesn't really matter. Oh, 6, is it? Yeah. But double digits soon, right? Yeah. So I saw that they reached an agreement on the tax there, 15% on backpacker. So maybe they're learning to adjust and actually speak to each other in Australia. So we know Australia and New Zealand remains very attractive from investment and performance interest. Now, if you compare that Central South Asia where we are now, please remember that that includes India, Sri Lanka, Maldives, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and all these countries. Not just India, not just Sri Lanka. So what happens is it dropped down and it stayed pretty steady and is slightly above the levels of 2009. The takeaway from this slide is really when you look at it all spread out, they all have different cycles. They're all in different ways. So as an investor, you have to look at where are you ready to step in? Where are you willing to go? Because Southeast Asia, you see that last pinkish line there, it grew really quickly. Back in the day at Indonesia, Thailand, Malaysia, and Singapore grew rates really rapidly. But for various reasons, it's been challenging since. Indonesia with austerity measures, Malaysia with airline incidents and domestic challenges, and Thailand with a coup, and Singapore with too much new supply. So different reasons. So we need to drill down on country level. And to give you the latest here, if you look at, I think we're starting with, let me start with the challenging markets, if you will. And I mean, I can mention on Australia, it's a tale of 2 sides, where you have Sydney and Adelaide and Melbourne to a certain extent keep growing really well. But obviously mining, so your Darwin, your Brisbane, your Perth, have seen tougher times in the last year or so. It's a split country in that sense from performance. Mainland China, which looks flat there, similarly, it's a tale of 2 stories, where the big cities, so Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou, Shenzhen, and even Chengdu now, have seen good growth for the past 2.5 years because supply slowed down, right? Fewer for luxury, fewer upscale hotels will be built, eased the pressure on the market, found performance back up. Instead, all the new supply, like we heard from Hansen talking earlier, people looked at the secondary, tertiary, 4-tier markets. The Home-Ind, Huazhu, and Jinjiang, and all those big brands kept growing so quickly in those, for the future, for those markets. So big cities, quick growth. Secondary, tertiary Chinese markets, not so much. Skip a few markets there. I see Indonesia still there moving upwards, but I suppose Maldives deserves to mention. We've seen that negative growth for quite some time now. We talked about the length of stay. In the last 3 or 4 years, it's dropped 1.5 days. So if you drop 1.5 days in length of stay, that will have an impact. Shift in source market. China still has 25% of the market. 25% of the arrivals into Maldives are from China. But it's decreasing. So I suppose when you have more Indians coming, as you're seeing the trend now, that will be a shorter length of stay. But this year, the length of stay is almost flat to last year. So I would write that down more to that the international arrivals, which is, around 1 million, 1.1, it's slowing down. It's still growing, but it's slowing down. So continues to be a bit of a pressure on the Maldivian hotel performance and the owners there as well. Now on the flip side, we could just keep that slide up there for a while, couldn't we? Sri Lanka. It's very nice. We haven't seen that in a long time, but just this is quite extraordinary, and I'm happy to be here and talk about this. Clearly, it's not just about how you grew RevPAR in the first 10 months of the year, but it's a great story, and it sets the stage for, I suppose, my final point later. Where are we heading after this? Because 15% RevPAR growth is fantastic. New Zealand is up there and have been there now for 3 or 4 years. Fantastic job from, the Prime Minister is the tourism minister. They're driving a lot of new airlift from the Middle East into New Zealand, lack of new supply, so they're doing really well. But Vietnam is a better comparison in that sense. Vietnam has seen fantastic investment interest. So many of these islands, Phu Quoc, etc., every inch is being planned for a new resort, and also in the cities. There's a lot of keys coming, so you could argue Vietnam needs this growth for the future supply coming. So it shares a little bit of dynamics with Sri Lanka. Thailand is growth over growth. Remember, the coup was 2 years ago, so this is just showing that Thailand, again, is the most resilient market in the world. Doesn't matter what happens, it keeps growing. People keep coming. But it shares one thing with Sri Lanka. It is known as the most hospitable nation in the world. People talk about the Thai hospitality, people talk about Sri Lanka. So another way you can tie in why Sri Lanka has something going for it, it has that, what people in Southeast Asia would say, that Thai values of hospitality, which is really hard to acquire or fake, which is an enormous asset for Sri Lanka, as we know. India, if I talk about India, maybe I can ask Jasmeeta, do you have a mic? No, can we get a mic down there, please, while I talk about Malaysia and South Korea? Because Malaysia and South Korea is growth over growth, right? Last year was not good. MERS in South Korea, the outbreak, and Malaysia had airline incidents and domestic challenges. So, but on India, since I have Jasmeeta works for us in Bombay, instead of me pretending to be Indian, can I ask you about what's behind, because I haven't seen in the last few years India with that strong growth. What's behind that, please, Jasmeeta?
Well, everyone knows the Indian domestic market is expanding. Up until October, at least, we've seen an increasing economic growth, the rising middle class, which leaves more disposable income available. So the Indians are traveling. Additionally, I think we've seen a fair bit of increase in terms of international travelers coming in. The new supply has slowed down to close to 3%, and demand is, for all these factors mentioned, gone up. That also, I think, gives some bit of confidence to hoteliers to at least hold their rates or push their rates a little more. So with demand up, rates being pushed higher, the result is in front of you.
Fantastic, thank you. Rate growth in India, something we haven't seen in a long time. Japan continues to grow, but you can't grow 30% year over year all the time. It has to stop somewhere. Occupancy is super high in that country. So let's leave that and start talking about Sri Lanka. So Super Mario can't stop jumping up. I just love, do you see the Olympics when they handed it over in the Rio? How Shinzo Abe jumped up pretending to be Super Mario? One of my favorite moments this year. A serious leader turning to Super Mario. So you know about these arrival growth. I'm just putting it up there so you have it in context when we get to performance. How it's growing 20, 27%, and it looks like we may reach that 2 million pretty soon. But you can see that even though that's October, growth is not going to be 20 to 25%, probably a little bit less. So, which is still fine, between 15 and 20% is amazing growth. So, two things to call out on the overall Sri Lanka performance. One is, of course, rate. So, if occupancy is almost flat down there, but the growth year to date has been rate. So we'll drill down on that in a second, but that looks just extraordinary. That looks like, former Indonesian growth in rate, and where is that coming from? And the second point around supply-demand, because supply has been growing, and demand just crunched down a little bit. We talked in the previous slide how that shifted a bit now, the growth of the arrivals, but it's also domestic, and what's happening. So if we look at the supply and demand, and I suppose, Jasmeeta, you've looked at this in detail as well, traveling more here unfortunately, than I do. You get to go here more often, as it's your region. But maybe you could tell us a little bit about that, because the supply growth is that's interesting, but also weigh it in with the demand, please.
The supply growth, yes, has been constantly increasing, but I think 4 to 5% is very normal. It's not something that anyone should be worried about. It's something we see very commonly in the region. In terms of demand, yes, you showed international travelers are improving, but demand, I think, this year has softened. Again, in markets like these, we do see these kind of fluctuations and variances. It's not something to be very disturbed about. It
No,
will
I'm
bounce
not.
back.
Exactly, because we can't be overly concerned. I mean, Sri Lanka is not Myanmar. I mean, Myanmar has the demand of like the Swiss mountain trail. But Thailand has this demand engine, right? 30 million, 35, 40. People just keep coming. It's still a reasonably young tourism destination that people are still discovering, and demand will go up and down. So from that point of view, it's hard to get concerned about it. I would agree.
And that number will go up. It is just October. Peak season is picking up now.
That's right. That's right. Yes, and we'll come back in January and report on that. And if you look at the overall performance, you can see how it dropped down a little bit and the occupancy held down. So that's the reason why rate was up so much. Last year, rate did not do that well. Now, Jasmita, if you look at the rate overall there, what was happening there from 2015? Like, I suppose the gradual, because it was a number of years ago we had the minimum rate on Colombo. But what's in the last year there?
I think there is confidence with increased demand. There is confidence. Hotels are working their rates. Also, we are seeing, we're talking at it from a very low base. There was a drop in the last 2 years.
Yeah.
So it's just trying to come back to its normal rate and try and get higher from there.
Yeah, it was a reasonably low base, I suppose, comparatively to other markets. Now, if we look, one way of looking at it by day, what's happening on weekday, for overall Sri Lanka, it's a bit interesting, we found, and that's why I'm showing it, because, so it looks like a business destination overall. You got midweek performing higher occupancy, but so weekday's the busiest. This is interesting, though. The midweek rates are lower, right? That's a bit inverted, what you see from normal destinations. Midweek business travel, higher rates. Overall Sri Lanka, no. Weekends, higher rates, lower occupancy. So shift in dynamics. And when we show you Colombo, it's going to be a little bit different. So bear that in mind. So let's talk about Colombo. Now, what's happened here, Jasmita? So I just showed you Sri Lanka, and there was occupancy down and rates up. So what's the difference in Colombo?
Yes. In terms of RevPAR, I think Colombo has almost seen a 22% increase, which is courtesy occupancy and ADR going up. I think as a capital, it has benefited from, one, the increase in international travel that is coming into Sri Lanka. There is increase in demand for corporate travel, and I think MICE business is also picking up in the country. And that's...
Yeah, and if we then look at the business traveler there, my Lego dude, you look at that, weekday up and rates up much higher. So that's more like, oh yeah, that rings a bell. I've seen that. So Colombo, of course, then it makes sense. But overall Sri Lanka, if you go and include the regional parts of Sri Lanka, then you're starting to see that inverted behavior.
Yep.
So that I suppose that's the explanation. Colombo still has the normal dynamics of a business location. Now, I want to talk about compression. So compression is usually in a market when you have high occupancy. So if you're not a revenue manager, if you don't spend time on this, so that's my 10-second thing. When there's high occupancy, so you take your Auckland, Tokyo, Singapore, Hong Kong, it's hard to get a room. It's hard to get a room. What happens? Well, hotels in many of those markets should then try and get some more rates so that you as an owner see more money on your bottom line, and everybody happy in the brands, and the customers not so happy perhaps because they need to pay more. So that compression, usually global 80-85%. That's when we see the dynamics start to shift in a market. So what we did, we looked at Sri Lanka, and because Sri Lanka doesn't yet have the 80-90% on a regular basis, we lowered it a bit. So between 70 and 80% occupancy. Last year, 79 days. And this year 100 days, from January to October. So 300 days counted, 100 days had between 70 and 80%. So we could call it low compression. It's not that 80, 90. And then 80 and higher, so the normal compression, 23 days this year. All right, so there's a shift already that has happened from last year, but it's also, there's more hotels, supply is already open, so it spreads out a bit. So then the more important question is, how does Sri Lanka perform in getting that rate? So compare then where that 100 fits to other markets. So I did not include Japan and Singapore. It wouldn't be fair. So it sits there with Thailand and Philippines, between 70 and 80, 80%. So around 100 days of the year so far, they have that. So who gets the most rate? And this is a very encouraging message that I was not really expecting, because we talk about the confidence in a market. Yes, I'm aware that you will have difference in source market. Is it branded, non-branded, other dynamics that play into this. But it's encouraging to see that when occupancy hits 75%, hotels in Sri Lanka are ready to get 9% higher rate. Compare that to Vietnam, which is growing so quickly, 1%. So I would say statistically relevant that in that bracket, Vietnamese hoteliers are not getting as much rate in return as they do here in Sri Lanka. If we move, is everyone with me on that? Or is it more like, yeah, I got to go back to my phone? I don't know. Is it too deep, revenue management? I mean, you're with me, Karen, because I know you know this stuff, so that's good. You can tell people later, yeah? Thank you. So on occupancy, if we move then to the 80% and higher, what we say is real compression. Fewer nights, clearly. So 23 nights. And you see Thailand there, 114. Good growth up there. So out of those 23 nights, what's the difference then? Well, still 8%. Definitely pretty good compared to Asia-Pacific countries. Because up at those levels, you got Singapore at 5%, Hong Kong at 5.5%. You have these really supposedly mature markets that are not getting the rate up really high. So I think this is a great, fantastic story when we look at the opportunity ahead, because people say, oh, immature markets don't have the revenue management knowledge, the GM knowledge to know when to adapt the rates. Well, at least in this sense, it looks like they're not too bad. Not too bad. Let's look at pipeline quickly at the end as well. Independent, meaning that we don't know which bracket it will fall into yet, if it's going to be a luxury upper upscale, because there may not be a brand attached to it yet. But it's pretty clear, and I think you all know, most of the properties coming in Sri Lanka is going to be on the higher end, as you can see. And when are they coming? Well, they're coming soon, because half of them are under construction. There's a lot of hotels coming, and they're coming soon. And that's Sri Lanka. How about Colombo? 75% increase in rooms compared to what exists today. Now that's, to me, is a Qatari number, right? That's a Middle Eastern number, because that's what they've been looking at. So a lot of new hotel rooms coming, but performance is up. So there's a bit of a balancing act to look ahead in that sense. My final slide, really before the summary, is on this. If you look at from 2012, how these countries, so India, Indonesia, Malaysia, and Philippines, pretty much back where they started in 2012. Malaysia and Indonesia, a little bit tougher. Indonesia continues to feel a crunch from less government spend and a lot of new hotel rooms. Then, of course, you have Vietnam and Thailand. Vietnam continues to grow. They will need it with all that new supply. And then Thailand continues to grow strongly. Where's Sri Lanka? So it did take a deep dive down in 2013, but it's continued to grow. So the question is, of course, now, what's going to happen after this? So in my summary, Sri Lanka has the strongest RevPAR growth out of any, I think French Polynesia might have edged it, but I removed them. They're smaller. Sri Lanka is a big nation. So Sri Lanka has some of the strongest RevPAR growth in Asia Pacific. And it's been rate overall, as you saw, the 15% up there in rate. There's a lot of rooms coming, particularly in Colombo. But in Colombo, the difference is that it's both in occupancy and ADR, right? So it's in both segments across Sri Lanka. It's not so much both. And the nice surprise then from an operational standpoint, it's not too bad. Compression days, hoteliers are doing a pretty good job. So my final point is around that. I think it's game on. You have a challenge with all these new hotel rooms coming. It's going to put some pressure on that supply-demand. But you have already seen and shown, if you're a hotelier here, that you can adjust the rates. You're increasing the demand. You're making it easier for people to come here. It's not going to happen in one day. So I'm cautiously optimistic. I am still more bullish than bearish on where it's going to go, absolutely, because if you compare these fundamentals to what we've seen in Vietnam and in Myanmar, who share some of the fundamentals, I'm still seeing that it should work out well. So it's more a question, can Sri Lanka do a home run and get it quickly, or is it going to be slower growth? So hopefully some of that stuck as now. So that was a lot of the data. So I think we have time for some Q&A.
Why not?
Why not? Let's see if someone wants to ask any questions.
Well,
on this.
I just have one question just to kick things off a little bit.
Yes.
A very simple question. How did you compile all this information? What did you look at in terms of what was important to include in all of this?
Well, whenever we do these things, we assimilate too much data first and try to find the stories. And Sri Lanka is it's simple because if you summarize that last slide, it's really, everyone talks about the new supply and what the performance is growing. And again, I'm really thankful to all the hotels in Sri Lanka that continue to work with us and provide the data, because all our data is proprietary. It comes from the hotels around the world. From there, it's nothing, scraped or sourced from other sources. We have this great relationship for 3 decades now with the hotels, and in Sri Lanka, it's growing. So it was easy to see the story here. It's a positive story. It's always been nice to talk about that. Same as in India now.
What was the most interesting variable, do you think?
Well, today, supply and demand plays a big piece. So you've got to be cautious and deal with it. Now, I hope and I think that Sri Lanka will reach a stage where we talk more about total RevPAR and GOP par and talk about the bottom line more, which is happening in a lot of other markets. But, step by step, we have to see that the supply and demand balance is delicate. It does have a very quick impact on market behavior. But performance is growing. I mean, people are trying to get higher RevPAR in general. Education, I'm really inspired to see I learned last time, the building of a school up north with 40,000 students in a tourism school. That's going to be sorely needed. But it sounds like Sri Lanka is doing that. They're taking that seriously to not just have Sri Lankese, but also foreigners coming in to learn at a state-of-the-art tourism school. So I think that's a fantastic project that I'm impressed by.
All right, let's open it up to all of you. Does anyone? Yes, sir. I think I'll grab the microphone.
Oh, he's got one.
Oh, you have one. Oh, it should be on.
Thanks. I studied your chart just now.
That's
a few
good, thank
data
you.
points. Yeah, I'm quite a numbers person. There are a few data points. 75% increase in hotel rooms in the next couple of years, and also the current occupancy rate is maybe hovering around 70%. And did you have any analysis to show that with all this increase in tourists coming in the next 2 years, is it enough to absorb this 75% increase in hotel rooms, especially when I noticed that most of them is in a high-end segment? Did you have data points to indicate all these tourists coming in, which segment do they fall under? Thanks.
Yeah, I think we will have some pockets of challenges, right? It's not going to be straightforward for all the hotels. Now, you could drill down and say, well, it depends on if you're obviously your booking channels and how visible you are around the world. Can you capture that demand? Because the demand is going to grow fine, but when you got 5 neighbors instead of 2, who's got the better distribution platform? That's going to definitely play a role. And is your property new, or if it's has refurbishment needs? So all those things. But operational excellence again. It doesn't matter if you're an old property or a tired property. Sometimes we see that they can still outperform with all the other values. But I still think we will see in the next couple of years some hotels challenged, absolutely. Because the Taj, the Shangri-La, and everything here, it is tough times ahead. So I don't think we should, sugarcoat it and say, oh, great, look at all the new tourists. That supply is real. And what I'm reporting there, you know, the 4,200, is that Colombo? Yeah. Oh, Sri Lanka. I mean, all those rooms, 3,500 in Colombo. I mean, all that coming, it's going to mean something too. I mean, that choice. And when I look at that, I look at the confirmed. People might say, like, oh, no, it's 5,000, 6,000. But I only try to look at what I really trust is going to open. And that is a lot. And, you know, we look at, again, Qatari numbers or look at Singapore now, right? So Singapore's adding 6,000, 7,000 rooms over 2 years. And that's been a stable ship for a long time. But now they've had a year of negative RevPAR. Now, Singapore doesn't have confidence in driving rate. They never did. So that affected them a bit. So if we have that here, maybe there's a chance to pad that a bit better. But my best guess is that we will see hotels, outliers down here, challenged, and the ones that do well could actually capture it. It might be more divided, right? Because right now we're seeing the hotels over in Colombo moving more like in a cloud. So I would expect it to turn into more a Milky Way, like a galaxy. Stretch out a bit.
Could I have, just here?
All right. Quick question.
Yes, please.
There we go, I see you now.
Okay. Something confusing. What we heard at the last panel discussion was that there's lack of consistency in Sri Lanka, and that is affecting our tourist influx. Now here you say that the thing is growing and it's growing very fast. So that's the confusing part of it. That's one question. And the next question is, what makes the Maldives more attractive to a traveler, say, as far off as the United States? And you talk of the Maldives, the United States, they understand the situation. But you talk of Sri Lanka, no bugger knows about it. So, any views on that, those two aspects, please?
Sure, and I think as per your conversation you had on the panel there as well, that the inconsistency, I don't know if that was referring more to the development stage rather than performance, so operational. So I think that's a different. People are asking from an investor developer standpoint that the inconsistency or the challenges around if it's land or if it's debt or whatever it is, performance and operationally, we're seeing pretty consistent behavior, that people are knowing how to run their hotels, perhaps more than people expected they would be. Am I right in that? Okay, thank you. So I think that's a bit. But when we talked about Maldives, listen, Sri Lanka, Maldives have been pushing from a tourism agency for many years into those particular pockets where you have that kind of demand that you want to attract as a luxury destination. Sri Lanka started doing that a lot later. It is still the hidden gem. It is still the analogy you used earlier on the bride, was it?
Sleeping Beauty?
Sleeping Beauty. I like that. I like that movie too, because I have daughters.
It wasn't me.
It wasn't you. Okay. Take credit. So it was. It's the advantage. But I'm just like you. I'm still astounded. And again, I come back, and so we should never compare countries. But when you find something, it just hits a chord. Vietnam as well. For me, Vietnam remains also a hidden gem. You know, fantastic food and culture and all that, and hospitality. But people don't know about it. Now, the tourism board and the government are trying to fix that, but it's still scrambling, to be fair. Now, Sri Lanka, all these initiatives. The president here, I think, has done a fantastic job in this, endorsing this conference, moving ahead, trying to get everyone working in the same direction, investing and attracting the foreign investment. It's going to come. But if just ask New Zealand, just ask all those mature markets, trying to get the rich Americans and the Europeans and the rich Chinese, and it takes time. There needs to be trust for a long enough period so they feel, oh yeah. If I ask some of my colleagues in our head office in Tennessee, oh yeah, you should go to Sri Lanka. I bet you one of them, not all of them, but some of them will say, like, is it safe? I think they would, right? Because when I asked them a couple of years ago, you should come to Bangkok for our meeting, a couple of them said, ooh, is it safe? That's Bangkok. Bangkok's safe. That's fine. So I think that's a challenge, but keep doing what's happening here. It's going to attract those, but it's a big investment. You look at the competition from a marketing agency, that's big bucks that these spend.
I hate to do this, but we're out of time.
Oh no, we're just getting started.
I know.
All right, never mind.
But I'm
Thank
sure
you very
you'll
much
be
indeed.
available
Thank
for
you.
Lots of questions. Yes, but thank you
Thank
very
you.
much.